Welcome everybody to another episode of the Pierce Brothers. I'm Joe and I love guns. Today we're going to be discussing something a little controversial out there in the gun and AR-15 world, and I wanted to discuss those just as good guns, and are they just as good? That's the question that we will address. I will speak from my personal experience with some of those brands out there that everybody labels as just as good. I'll talk about my experience with some of the higher end options out there. And ultimately, the simple answer is no, they're not just as good. And during this video, I'll explain why, in my opinion, they are not just as good, and some of the benefits you'll get by going up to, say, a BCM as your lowest price point option, and some of the benefits you'll get for doing that, as well as the reasons that those just as good brands simply are not just as good. That's really as simple as it gets. So let's discuss first. When I say just as good, I'm talking in the $700 to $800 range and below. A lot of people claim that those guns are just as good as, say, a BCM that's going to run you about 15, or a Geissele that's going to run 2,000-ish. And they're not. They're just simply not. And I will discuss first some of my experience with those just as good brands. But ultimately, what you get from buying a quality rifle is you'll get better quality control, as well as better components that they put into that gun as far as all the parts. You'll get tighter tolerances, which lead to a rifle that will last longer and perform better, especially when it gets dirty. Something you'll notice with an entry-level gun, those sub $700 guns or sub $800 guns, is that they're very basic. There's nothing special about them. The bolt carriers are cheap, and the buffer springs, buffer tube, all that is cheap. You'll get cheap handguards. The rails won't integrate as nicely. There's just a lot about them, and you can go to any gun store and pick up a just as good gun and pick up a quality gun, run the bolt back a couple times with the charging handle, and you'll feel the difference. Like, there is a legitimate difference in how well those guns feel. Now, a lot of people, when they do these videos, they'll say, oh, the high-end gun just shoots so much smoother or flatter, and that is complete garbage. Although that is the case, typically you'll get less felt recoil, but that means nothing, literally. In my experience, they do shoot smoother though, and you'll pick them up and you can shoot them side by side, and you'll notice a noticeable difference in how smooth that gun cycles and how much felt recoil you feel. Now, there's a lot of factors that can lead to that, some of them being your gas system length, your buffer length, what kind of bolt carrier they got in there, is it a pistol, rifle, all of that will contribute to that. And then as well, if you just have, let's say, a carbine length gas system and a carbine buffer, and you shoot them side by side, depending on the buffer spring and the buffer weight, you may get a totally different experience in those guns. So when you buy a cheaper gun, there's just parts that you got to upgrade to make it better. And typically that means the bolt carrier, the buffer spring, and the buffer weight. Those are three basic things to upgrade that will help that gun shoot smoother and increase its life and longevity. Now, when I talk about some of these just as good brands, I will only discuss ones that I have personal experience with. Let's start with PSA, because that's a pretty hot topic. You can get a gun for about $500 or less on sale, and people out there say, oh, it's just as good, and yet you'll take it out and you're going to have issues with it, just period. I've owned two PSAs. One was an 11.5-inch pistol. The other was an 18-inch rifle. So what I noticed is that they both performed pretty well out of the box till about 300 rounds. And then you started noticing some cycling issues. You'd have to use the forward assist frequently. And ultimately, I got to the point where in a magazine on the rifle, I was having to use the forward assist and run the cycle or the bolt without it cycling like 5 to 6 times per magazine. So that's a pretty high rate of failure. Took it home, cleaned it, did all that, lubed it up, went out. Again, it was perfect till about 300 rounds, and then it started gumming up enough that it wouldn't cycle. And the pistol was similar, but it wouldn't gum up as bad. So it would still cycle because that pistol length gas system just is a lot more violent in how it cycles. So it would still, around 300 rounds, have to get cleaned, or you'd have some of those issues where you're bumping your forward assist in that. So my very first ever AR-15 was a Ruger AR-15. That was back like 2010. And back in those days when that assault weapons ban was lifted, everybody started making ARs. Just like today, everybody makes an AR-15, and they're not all created equal. They just aren't. And back then, you could buy parts from all these different companies. You'd put them together into a gun that should work, and it wouldn't, because parts were out of spec. There were issues with people not holding tight tolerances on things. And so you'd get an upper and a lower. You couldn't seat magazines. I mean, it was just awful. So things have gotten better since then. And nowadays people all kind of stay within that spec to make sure everybody's in the same page. But higher end guns like a BCM and above, I'm not going to sit there and rank them because that's stupid. But BCM, in my opinion, is the lowest end gun that you should get as a gun you're going to rely on and use in a personal defense scenario, whether it's home defense or as your primary rifle. BCM is the minimum that you should get. So back to my first AR-15 was a Ruger, and that gun cycled pretty well. It was actually a pretty decent gun. That being said, back then I liked to clean my guns frequently, so I didn't push it to its limits really, but I did notice, you know, every few mags you'd have to use the forward assist, things like that, just some basic failures. But in my opinion, any failure is too many. Any failure is too many. Any failure is too many. Especially in the modern world with modern guns, we have guns that are ultra reliable. So there is no excuse for any malfunctions, period, unless it's some kind of junk ammo you're shooting, whatever, that causes that malfunction. So after having some experience with those, I shot a Smith & Wesson. I had one of those for a while. Again, I mean, it was pretty reliable, and I've heard of some Smith & Wessons doing really well. I know the M&P Sport 15s, the 3s, the 3 version, the newest iteration. They're a pretty good gun, but again, there's things you're going to have to upgrade if you want that rifle to last forever. I recommend that if you own an AR-15, you should have an extra bolt carrier and a bolt head, or both. Some extra parts, because things break. Things just do. Now, in the high-end guns, you're not going to have breakages or stoppages like you do in those cheap guns. So my first high-end, I guess you could say, gun was a BCM. Not this one. It was a basic model. But I decided that, you know, I want to get a gun that's going to be my forever gun that I can rely on and use and abuse, and it's not going to fail me when I need it. So I got that BCM, and I decided I'm going to run it and just see how far to go without cleaning. And I made it to 2,000 rounds and never had an issue. I kept it lubed, you know, I didn't just let it run dry and all that, but I kept it lubed and maintained, but I did not break it down and clean it. And over 2,000 rounds, we had 0 malfunctions at all, 0. And that was with a variety of ammo, weights, grains, manufacturers, all of that. And I finally cleaned it at 2,000, and then I didn't clean it again until I hit over 4,000. And then I did an accuracy test at 5,000 to see how accurate it was. And it was about a 2.5-inch group I got after 5,000 rounds, which isn't terrible, not great. And I'm going to clarify, I did a video here a bit ago comparing these two guns, the BCM and the Geissele, just comparing accuracy, because they're both very similar rifles as far as what they are and components and all that. Now, I'm not a bench shooter. I rarely shoot from a bench unless I'm putting something on paper at 100, and I just don't do that often because I like to shoot and move and train, and shooting from a bench is never going to be a real world scenario. Shooting prone, I do shoot prone, and I shoot better prone, so both of these guns would have performed better had I shot prone, in my opinion. But anyways, so that's my experience. I got this Geissele. I've had it now, we're around 1,000 rounds now, and I haven't cleaned it. Almost all of those 1,000 have been suppressed, so it's pretty dang dirty, and still no malfunctions. It's just those guns, those high-end guns just will not have the issues that those lower-end guns will have. They won't have the longevity issues that those lower-end guns have. Lower-end guns will need cleaned more frequently, they'll need maintained better, and they're just not going to last as long. The lifespans just aren't that. I've heard of PSA bolt carriers blowing up on people, you know, with not many rounds through them. And if your bolt carrier blows up on you, do not replace it with a PSA bolt carrier. I'm just throwing that out there. Get a Geissele, BCM, Sons of Liberty, something else that's a good quality bolt carrier and put it in there. And then again, I talked about your buffer spring in that. That's something to upgrade. Now, I'm not saying that those just as good guns won't function out of the box and won't perform well. Some of them will. But those are things that I would upgrade. I'd get a better bolt carrier. I'd get a better buffer. In my opinion, the mid-length buffer is the best buffer out there. It softens recoil a lot. So get yourself a kit from either BCM or Sons of Liberty. They both sell kits that are a mid-length buffer kit. And that will greatly reduce recoil and it'll make your gun shoot a lot smoother. But again, you're going to want a better bolt carrier, period. You know, those cheaper guns just don't have a good bolt carrier. They're cheap and they'll break. They'll wear out faster than a good quality bolt carrier will. So no, those entry-level guns are not just as good. Accuracy-wise, depending manufacturer, you're going to see variances here and there. Most people out there, those cheap guns are all sourcing their barrels from the same people. So you're probably going to see pretty similar barrel performance. I owned a Daniel Defense Mark 12. That was a pretty decent gun. Again, I shot it a lot, never had an issue with it. It wasn't quite as accurate as I wanted. I wound up selling that Daniel Defense Mark 12 and getting a different 18-inch gun. The Mark 12 from Daniel Defense, it just wasn't as accurate as I'd hoped, so I wanted to go to a carbon fiber barrel gun. So this is a stock gun, straight from Ruger, no modifications to it. It has the Proof Research carbon fiber barrel. This is the Ruger SPR. It's got a 223 Wild chamber, which is kind of the best of both worlds, a 5.56 and 223. It'll shoot both reliably. I did swap the muzzle brake to a dead air adapter there. But this gun has been very reliable and it's really accurate. You know, me, again, a bench shooter, I'm not a bench shooter, but I'm able to get sub MOA groups out of this gun at 100 yards. That carbon fiber barrel as well, it's just a carbon fiber wrapped barrel, but they guarantee those for about 15,000 rounds. So for a carbon fiber barrel, it's actually a very durable barrel. Now, if I were gonna rely on this gun in a serious manner, this is not my primary rifle, it's not my defensive rifle, I would upgrade the bolt carrier, buffer spring, all of that to make it better. It has a rifle length gas system and a rifle length buffer, so it's a very soft shooter. But again, that's kind of more of a varmint rifle to me. My guns that I would rely on in a serious defensive scenario would be my BCM. It's got a 1-to-8 power Trijicon on there, and then my Geissele, which has just a basic EOTech for that CQB style stuff. But again, these are both great rifles, and that Ruger is not a budget rifle, though. I don't think I clarified that. It's a $2,000 rifle, so this is not a just as good rifle. It's a premium rifle from Ruger, and it's been a really good rifle so far. But yeah, I mean, it's just, you get into those AR-15s, and if you're spending $700 or less dollars, it's just not going to be something that's going to be a long-term rifle, nor a serious use rifle. You got to get some upgrades in it and make it a better rifle. And by the time you buy those upgrades, you're going to be in it enough to just buy a BCM. This is one that's kind of a budget build in my opinion. It's a PWS upper, and PWS has a really great reputation in the AR-15 world these days. 223 Wild chamber on that one as well. And I just put it on an Anderson lower. I bought a cheap Anderson lower, parts kit and that, and put it together. So it's a pretty, I got that upper for really a good price. And this total build with the EOTech is, you know, just over $1,000 total. So it's a pretty dang good gun for the money. The Anderson lower, obviously Anderson is no longer, they don't exist anymore with Ruger buying them out. I am curious to see what happens on that front with Ruger taking over. I know they're not going to carry Anderson's name forward. They just bought it for the manufacturing capacity. But there are good budget rifles out there to get that you can afford to build and put together at a good price, and they're going to be much better than that just as good gun. So if you buy a just as good gun, make sure and get some extra parts for it, because you'll probably have some issues down the road sooner than you would have with a higher end gun. Now, I'm not saying higher end guns don't have issues. They do in fact have problems here and there. You know, every company has some quality issues here and there, but the chance of that happening is much lower than if you were to buy one of those other guns out there. So now, if you don't agree with me, throw it in the comments, whatever. That's just my take. Argue it out. I do believe that BCM, if it's going to be a personal defense weapon, is the lowest gun you should get out there. So there are other options though. Geissele puts their uppers on sale frequently. You can get an upper for a really, really good price and then match it with another lower that you find. And lowers, I mean, as long as it's in spec, they're going to be okay. I know there were some, Aero Precision had a big batch of bad lowers and they couldn't even seat magazines and that kind of stuff. So as long as you get a quality lower, you can put a parts kit in it and you're going to be just fine. As long as you get a quality parts kit. Don't go buy a piece of junk from some just as good company. So those are my thoughts. Throw it down in the comments. Let me know what you think. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate your support. And we'll see you guys next time on the Pierce Brothers.